Alright, so in the last episode we got the engine mounted and did a little bit of wiring and kind of set the steering in place. This episode we're going to get the steering and transmission mounted. We've got some tubing here, this square tubing, and we're going to use this to kind of make some pieces for our steering to mount to and for the transmission to mount to. Once those two things are in, that's everything we got to mount, right? Yeah, so once those two things are in, we're done mounting stuff. Major stuff anyway, and we can get to wiring and fueling this thing. So we decided to start with the most daunting mount, which is by far the power steering mount. This truck obviously came with a rack and pinion type steering. It seemed actually kind of complicated, and we wanted to move it over to power steering from the original LS swap. So this meant creating an entirely new mounting system for the power steering rack. I normally cut out a lot of our measuring and placement type of stuff, but I decided to leave it in this video just to show you guys how much movement we end up doing. We really use everything in the shop. You'll see pieces of wood, ratchet straps, levels, and measuring tapes, and straight edges, and carpenter squares. Basically, everything that we've got we use to try to get these parts in the right spot. And then once we get them there, it's a matter of figuring out how to keep them there so we can weld stuff up. We placed our mount on the actual power steering rack, and we're going to build from there. So this means centering the rack, getting it in the middle, getting it level, and then building up to our frame. From there, Chase is cutting a cardboard template that will just continue to trim down until it's close to the shape that we want. We couldn't really find a mathematical way to come up with this shape, so we decided that this trial and error through cardboard was going to be the best way to do it. So now we'll just cut that shape out of scrap tubing and throw it back into the frame. Now you're going to see us removing the piece and replacing it several times, and that's just us taking it back and sanding it down to get it to fit perfectly. Well, as close to perfect as we could get it. From there, Chase is going to tack this thing in so we can move to the other side. Now that the whole frame is tacked up, we're going to cut the tacks off and pull it out of the car to do the final welding all the way around our new joints. Then we'll place it back into the car and weld it up so that it becomes permanently mounted. So that was much harder than we ever could have expected and way more time consuming, but the transmission mount, on the other hand, was a relief. We used the same tubing as we used for our power steering rack mount, and we just drilled a hole in the center of the tubing. From there we marked it to the width of our frame and cut it. Now our transmission placement was in just the right spot where we could weld the tube to the bottom of the chassis, and the mount was fine. Alright, so we are officially mounted. This engine is floating in place. There's no more wood holding it up, no more straps. This is welded to the frame, and we are so stoked about it. The transmission sits at a really good angle. We think that our pinion angle is going to be good. We'll have to test it out later, but we can adjust it if we need to. What we're going to do now is lift the engine out so we can finish welding our power steering rack that's in now. We can finish welding and supporting our engine mounts, and we can finish welding the transmission mount. And then it'll be like the frame modification, dare I say, will be done. We may have some more supports that we throw in later, but for the most part, all the big stuff is done, which is crazy. This is the hard part, I think.
for us. We've got somebody else to do the wiring harness that does these things all the time. So I feel pretty good about that. We know the engine runs. We drove the truck before we pulled it out. So we know the transmission works. We know the engine runs. We know that this works. We have the same exact fuel system that we use in the old truck. So we know that works. So after we get this welded up, I'm gonna do some work on the wiring, trying to get that sorted. We can drop this thing back in and start plumbing and wiring everything up to get this thing to fire for the very first time. Once that's done, we will be ready to start building again. Chase and I will do the sheet metal work for the kind of trans-tunnel firewall combo, and then it'll head off to my house to have the wide body kit built. So we are moving, despite getting hacked, despite the channel getting deleted, we are still moving on this build, and it's actually going really, really well. So for now, we're gonna lift the motor out. I'm gonna work on the engine. Chase is gonna work on the frame, and then we will get it back together. Let's do it.